Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching. This is my third module for East Yorkshire, and it's on creating a culture of belonging for neurodivergent pupils. And my name is Catrina Lowri. So my name's Catrina, and I don't belong here. I don't belong because you think I'm weird. I don't fit in. You don't like me. And you think I'm odd or too much or overwhelming or loud or blunt or too quiet. But I don't fit in. So what are you going to do to help me feel like I belong in your school? Pause the video and think about that. So here on the screen, we have a quote from Brené Brown, who is an American researcher into emotions, and her particular areas of interest are empathy and shame. Well, someone's got to do it. I would definitely recommend that you look her up. She has one of the most popular TED Talks on, basically YouTube. It's had, hundreds of, possibly even hundreds of millions now, but certainly millions of views. And in it, she talks about shame and empathy in their relationship. She's written several books. She's done lots of other things since she did that original TED Talk. But one of the things that she talks about quite a lot is the sense of belonging. And we have this idea of fitting in. So in my beginning part, I talked about not fitting in, which was my experience of school. I never felt like I fitted in. I never felt like I fitted in anywhere I worked, which is part of the reason why I work for myself, because I should be able to fit in with myself, shouldn't I? But the thing is, when you actually look at what fitting in is, it is becoming who you think you need to be in order to be accepted. And that means effectively that you're masking your real true self. And there obviously has to be, to an extent, there has to be some of that that goes on. You can't just say what you like to whoever you like, whatever you, because like that wouldn't be socially acceptable. And you need to have manners, and you need to also have respect for other people within, your family, your school, and your wider community. But fitting in because you think you need to be a certain way is absolutely exhausting. And usually when people wear a mask, it is a mask of shame. Belonging, on the other hand, is being your authentic self and knowing that no matter what happens, you belong. So this is, a little bit later, we're going to talk about unconditional positive regard. This is about being accepted however you show up. All right. So everyone is going to have good days and bad when they come to school. As an adult, we are going to have good days and bad when we come to school. But that is okay because we're all human beings and we do fluctuate between one thing and another. So that is okay. But it's just like, if you know that when you get to work in the morning, or if you know that when your child goes to school in the morning, that however they show up, as long as they're being their authentic self, or as long as however they need to show up in the morning, they're going to feel as if this is the place that they belong, then that's what you call psychological safety. And psychological safety means fundamentally that when a child gets in trouble, they're going to run towards you, not run away from you. Okay, I'm going to do a little side video on this as well. So it's really important that if a child is in trouble, that they run towards authority figures and not away from them. So therefore, it's not useful or productive for either the child themselves or for the authority figures for the child to be afraid of those authority figures, whether they be parents, teachers, the police. Effectively, what we want them to do is to find the authority figure and come towards them. And that is about creating a sense of psychological safety. So if a child comes to you because they're in trouble, or they come to you because they've been dysregulated in another class and you're their safe adult, it's fantastic that they have chosen somebody, because the last thing you want them to do is to run away from authority in that situation. They need an adult who can keep them safe. And if you created that psychological safety and that sense of belonging, then that child will know that no matter what happens, they can tell you the truth. And there'll be situations where if they don't tell you the truth, it's going to affect their health and safety. If they don't tell you the truth, then they could potentially even be wrapped up in something that's illegal. They could be wrapped up in something that is dangerous to themselves or others. So you need them to feel that they have enough trust and belief in you that whatever happens, they can tell you the truth. And the way you do that is by creating this sense of belonging. So kids are going to come to you with on good days and bad, right? But if they can be authentic and they can really trust that you will be consistent, you will follow through, you will listen to them, and you will support them without judgment, then that, that ultimately is probably the core of what you need to do in school, because it's such a huge important part of well-being and also safeguarding. Okay. Right, so what does this actually mean for your child in mind? So throughout this series, I've asked you to have a particular child in mind. And we've talked about thinking about what your hopes and aspirations are for that child and how you're going to use this information to help this child. Now, in this particular topic, this is cultural. So the good news is that whatever you do here will affect all of the children within your environment, whether you are a teaching assistant who works with individuals or small groups, whether you are a class teacher who's in charge of 30 or more children on a daily basis, or has a variety of different children on different days, depending on your particular role, or whether you are somebody in senior leadership who works with specific children and also has oversight of a key stage or possibly an entire school. So this is probably the most important piece of training that I'm giving out of these 4 modules. However, it's very useful for you to have a particular child in mind, because as I've said before, if you can make what I'm about to tell you work for that child, then you can extrapolate that across your groups, your class, your entire school, and in fact, it could be impactful for your local community as well. So a little bit of a reminder of who I am. So my name is Catrina Lowri, and I'm an experienced SENCO and qualified teacher of SEND. I was also an advisory teacher for Gloucestershire County Council. I'm the founder of Neuroteachers, which is my company, and I work with nurseries, schools, colleges and businesses to improve inclusion for neurodivergent people through training, mentoring and culture change. And this is my absolute favourite, doing culture change work. I love to do that the most because I feel it's the most impactful. So I am also neurodivergent myself. So I come at this from the point of view of being a teacher, but also a neurodivergent individual. And so I have been that pupil that you may have had in mind, because I certainly gave my teachers a few head scratchy moments during my school career. So today we're going to be talking about what actually is in fact belonging, which we've touched on a little bit. We're going to talk about empathy and respect and what that means for individuals and why that is so important. This is what we will cover today. So we're going to discuss what is belonging, being relational, what is empathy, what is respect, creating inclusive classrooms, protected characteristics, leadership and management, what this means for your classroom, top tips, and your questions answered. So if you do have any questions at any time, please do contact me. I'm highly contactable both by social media and also via email. Those contact details will be given to you at the end. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, why aren't children automatically respectful to adults? And there's this myth that there was this golden era sometime in the past when children respected their elders. It's not true. And I can tell you it's not true because there's writings about this going back as far as ancient Greece. So even in Aristotle and Plato's time, there was this belief that children were far less respectful than they were in previous generations. But there is definitely something going on with behaviour, and things have changed recently for societal reasons. But I thought this piece of research was very interesting. So this comes from Mel Robbins. I mean, she's best known for having a podcast, but she has a legal background, and she's very interested in sociology and anthropology and also psychology as well. She is well worth looking up her books and also her podcast if you are interested in those things. And she was talking about a piece of research, and this was of 10-year-olds in America. It was a large study with children from several different schools across the United States. And they followed them across time, and they found that when they first started school, the three things that children really wanted were to be seen, to belong, and to be celebrated. But by the time they were just 10 years old, so at that point in America, they had 5 years of schooling. So Britain, they'd also be year 5. They felt invisible, like outsiders, and often belittled or ignored by key adults. As we'll talk about later, respect is not something that is automatically engendered. If you look up the definitions of respect, it, just from the Oxford English Dictionary, it says that you gain respect by your actions and your activities and your authenticity. So there is no automatic respect for adults by children. That has to be earned. And I know that's a fact that a lot of adults don't enjoy, but it does. And so I really think that if we were able to create children with that sense of belonging so that they feel seen and celebrated, then it might be easier for them to recognize the skills in the adults who are working with them and that they're doing this for their own good, rather than feeling invisible like an outsider or belittled or ignored. Bit of a stark reality, that, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story about something I got very terribly wrong in my early career. I'm really keen on case studies. I do quite a lot of them. I mean, on my website, on my blog, I've got quite a lot of stories from children who I've worked with. Obviously, the names and some of the details are changed, so they can't be recognized. But this is one that really hit home for me and absolutely changed my attitude. In many ways, I learned an awful lot from Maria. So to create empathy and respect, we have to start with our own experience. So this is my own experience. Many years ago, at the beginning of my career, I worked with a girl called Maria, and that's not her real name. Obviously, the names have been changed for the basis of this story. And it was a school with a really strict uniform policy. But Maria would like to wear these really large hooped earrings. And it was a battle. You could be spending 20 minutes of a lesson trying to get her to take these huge dangly hoop earrings out. They were large and gold and reached almost down to her shoulders. They were very, very prominent. And it would be lesson after lesson after lesson. I would be battling with Maria to get her to take these earrings off. And I just couldn't understand why these earrings were of so much importance to her. And I realized that quite a lot of the way in which I was approaching her was due to my personal unconscious bias. Because Maria was from a culture I didn't really know anything about. She was from a gypsy traveler culture. And I didn't, at the time, I knew very little about, I still don't know a huge amount now, but at the time I didn't know anything about her. And I had bias and prejudices against her. She was loud. Her language was quite colourful. She had very strong opinions. And I'll be honest with you, I found it really difficult to find anything that I related to about her. But she is probably one of the children who has taught me the most about teaching over the years, and that's why I share her story. Okay, so one of the big problems that I had was that I lacked empathy for Maria. These earrings were hugely, hugely important to her. And I could not understand for the life of me why. And at the time, I didn't know about this piece of research from Brene Brown, who is going to feature quite a lot during this training, by the way. So do look her up. I bear no affinity. I just like her work. So this is a quote from Brene Brown. Empathy doesn't require us to have the exact same experience as the person sharing the story with us. Empathy is connecting with the emotion that someone is experiencing, not the events or the circumstance. Okay. So it actually didn't matter that I didn't understand why Maria was so attached to these large gold hoop earrings. What I could empathize with, had I, had the hindsight to do so, was that these were important to her and she clearly had some kind of sentimental attachment. Now, I personally didn't see what the sentimental attachment could be to a pair of earrings. They were just earrings as far as I was concerned. But I did know what it's like to be sentimental. And I did know what it's like to have objects that had a certain affinity, that I had a certain affinity with. But at the time, I wasn't able to connect to that because I didn't have this piece of knowledge. So when it comes to working with our neurodivergent children, there's a good chance you may not be neurodivergent. I mean, 80% of people aren't. And that actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you might not be autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, dyspraxic, etc. You may not be any of those things. And that doesn't actually really matter. What matters is at some point in your school career, you may have struggled. At some point during your school career, you may have had a social difference. At some point during your school career, there may have been a time when you had a sensory experience that was unpleasant, like maybe a fire alarm went off unexpectedly. Or, the drains broke at school and it smelled really bad. There could have been some time when you've had that. You might not experience sensory overload, but you know what it's like to have an unpleasant sensory experience. So I think that this is a really important thing to do when it comes to creating cultures. You do not have to have shared the exact same experience to have empathy, because empathy is about the connection to the emotional experience, not the events or the circumstances. And that was something that would have been really, really important for me to know when it came to Maria, but more of that later. And the next question is, why are emotions important? Now, we tend, especially in this country, I think it might be getting a little bit better, but especially in this country, we have a tendency to put far too much emphasis, in my opinion, on rational thought. And rational thought is thought of as being the king of everything. And we really want children to be rational about things. Well, as you'll see, that's not actually that useful, but I'll get to that in a minute. And another piece of research that came from Brene Brown, and this is in her book, Atlas of the Heart, in case you're interested in looking it up. Like I said, no affiliation, but it is good. I would definitely recommend the audiobook as well if you're the sort of person who likes audiobooks, but it's pretty deep. it's brilliantly read the way she's done it, and it is very relatable, but a lot of the stuff in it will make you go, whoa, I've got my perception of emotions all wrong. So what she says is, what she says in this is that, and this is in the prologue, by the way, she says that rather than being thinking beings who occasionally have emotions, we're actually emotional beings who occasionally have thought. So that was in the prologue. I had to listen to it about 5 times before I really took that in. And that is according to all of the research that she's done. Bear in mind, her job is to research emotions, specifically empathy and shame. And that is probably the most vital piece of information in the entire book. So most of our decisions, most of our experience, most of our life, we are feeling emotions first and then occasionally having thoughts about them. And what is another really startling statistic is the one that I'm about to tell you. But for the time being, what I would like you to do is briefly pause the video and think about how many emotions you think the average adult can recognize in themselves and name them. So which ones are they? So pause the video now. Welcome back for those of us who are turning their screens back on again. Hello. Right, so this piece of research came from Brene Brown. She did some research with a large group of adults. It was in the thousands of people in Houston, Texas. There's no reason to believe that people in the population outside Houston, Texas are any better at this than anyone else. So in that survey, she found out that the average adult could name and recognize 3 emotions in themselves: happy, sad, angry. And yet we try our best to teach emotion to neurodivergent children. So that's interesting, isn't it? The next thing is human emotions are quite complex. So again, according to Brene Brown in her book, Atlas of the Heart, there are 87 recorded and studied human emotions. She goes into this in quite a lot of depth in that book, as I say, like I said, no affiliation, but I would recommend it, especially the audio version. But like I said, have a cup of tea and go to the loo before you read it, and sit down with a nice drink and in a comfy chair, because it's quite like there's going to be a lot of whoa moments in it. It really is quite interesting, but it just goes to show how little we actually understand about emotions, even those of us who've been studying this for years. So in this, she said there's 87 recognized emotions. The question is, before we go and try and teach, empathy and respect to our children, how many emotions can we actually recognize in ourselves? Now, during the next session, we're going to be talking about emotional regulation, and we'll be talking about it pretty much linked to the zones of regulation, which is a very common intervention in a lot of schools. In fact, it's a common curricula, because that's really the way it should be presented. And what is interesting, if you've ever participated in that in your school, is that sometimes the adults really, really struggle to explain how they are feeling. And that's something that should certainly be practiced first before we try and work with our children on this. Something to be thinking about anyway. Okay, so back to Maria. Like I said, I had unconscious bias. Now, at the time, I didn't know that I had unconscious bias, because I didn't know what unconscious bias is. And it's the kind of phrase that gets bandied about quite a lot. But the thing about unconscious bias is we have it all the time for all kinds of reasons, for all different things. In fact, if you are currently wearing socks, you will have unconscious bias about which sock you put on first. If you're wearing tights, you will also have put one foot in the tights before the other. And the likelihood is that you do it in the same order every single day. And you probably hadn't thought about it ever before. But if somebody questioned you about it, you probably will spontaneously come up with a reason for why you chose that particular sock over the other one. But it's really interesting to think that we all have biases against everything, including potentially our own socks. Right, and this is why we have unconscious bias. Fundamentally, it all breaks down to the fact that it's just quicker. It's far quicker for us to make a value judgment immediately with somebody than it is for us to actually think about things. And this piece of research comes from Daniel Kahneman, who is actually, he is a, I can never remember which way around it is, economic psychologist. So he studies how economies, how people's psychological experience affects the way economies work. It's very interesting. And his books are very definitely worth a read again. But like I want to say, sit down, make sure you're comfortable, have a cup of tea, go to the toilet first, because it is going to blow your mind. Honestly, I mean that in the nicest possible way. However, this is a really interesting piece of research. So when it comes to making decisions, we have two systems that we use. The first one is intuitive and instinctive, and we use those for 95% of our decisions. Now we have to make hundreds of decisions every single day. So back to the aforementioned socks. Not only did you have to decide which sock you were going to put on first, you had to decide which socks you were going to wear, whether you were going to wear a particular color of socks or a particular pattern of socks, or whether they were just clean. But you would have chosen some for sure, and you would have made the decision very quickly because this is unconscious, fast, associative, and automatic pilot. Okay, so that is 90% of our decisions. On the other hand, there's also the rational system. So this is rational thinking. Only around 5% of our decisions are based on rationality. So this is thought rather than feeling. The first one is feeling, which is most of our decisions, and the 5% of those are based on thought, right? This takes effort, it's slow, it is logical, but we can have a tendency to get lazy with it because it's an awful lot of effort, and we can sometimes be indecisive. It's very easy to go into analysis paralysis. So I'm going to give you a for instance. If you go to a well-known coffee chain, so we're just going to choose Starbucks, although other companies are available. Now, first of all, I say, okay, everybody's watching this right now. We're going to Starbucks straight away. Okay. So there'll be some of you who go immediately, I don't like Starbucks. I'm going to stand on the pavement waiting outside. That's fine. You've already made a decision. So that's your first decision. And there'll be some of you who are going, right, what's your order? And you're going to say, I'm having a cappuccino. I'm having a flat white. I'm having a mochaccino. I'm having a chai tea. You will have made your decision automatically straight away. Okay. And that's good because it's quick. When you get to the front of the queue, I can just read off the list of all of those things that you've just told me. Everyone gets their order within a few minutes and we'll be on our way. We don't have to spend too much time in Starbucks, which isn't everybody's favorite sensory experience. However, if you get to the front of the queue at Starbucks and there's somebody who's looking up above going, what do I want now? Well, I don't want to have too much liquid, so I'm not going to have a frappuccino because that would be too much. But it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Do I really want caffeine at this time of day? Because I might not sleep too well later. However, I have that meeting with Sheila later, and she does talk quite a lot, and it's really difficult to concentrate. So perhaps I should have a caffeinated drink. But then again, if somebody's doing that at the front of the queue, you are already bored and furious because you're thinking, why haven't you made the decision before you got in here? You know what Starbucks has on the menu. Everyone's been to Starbucks. You're a grown-up. Why are you taking so much time over it? But that person's being rational, though. It's rational for you to think about having the right drink, giving on your particular circumstance. However, when you choose something from a takeaway menu, you will not be rational about it. You'll have what you like. because you liked it last time. So you know you're going to like it this time. And that's why we have chain restaurants, and that's why they're so popular, because you know what you're going to get as soon as you walk in through the door, which makes it quicker. Because everybody knows, including the people who make commercial enterprises, that 95% of our decisions are based on intuition and instinct. They're not rational at all, because it's quicker, and that's okay. So what does this mean about Maria? So again, we have our unconscious bias against people. Right. What kind of bias did I have against Maria? So I had three main types of bias against her. First, I had negativity bias. I had negativity bias against her because I had been warned about her. When I got given the register, when other members of staff saw that I had her name on the list, they're like, oh, good luck with that one. Meant that I had negativity bias before I'd even met her. Just because of her name on a list, I had negativity bias. I automatically assumed she was going to be hard work because I've been told that. I also had conformity bias because it was a school and the school had rules, and I just assumed that, because this was the beginning of my career and I used to think things like this, I assumed that children automatically know that the rules apply to them and that they have to follow the rules, and why can't they just conform, right? I also had intuition bias because of her general demeanor. Like I said, she was a loud, tall, argumentative child. She seemed like a whirlwind the first time she even came into the classroom. So my intuition was that she was going to be difficult. So even before she opened her mouth, just as soon as I looked at her, I already had bias against her. And then on top of that, there was these massive gold earrings that just seemed to me like she was wearing them deliberately just to wind me up, because she knew I was going to have to spend ages trying to persuade her to take them off, because that was the school rules and I had to maintain the uniform policy. So the next question is, which biases do you see in action? So I'm going to talk you through a few of these ideas. So the first one is halo effect. So you may have a child in your school and you taught their brother and sister, and their brother and sister was just the loveliest child, and they were ever so bright and they couldn't do enough for you. So you see the name of this child, the same surname, or you know that they're the brother or sister of that child, and you automatically assume that this child is also going to be an absolute angel and you're really looking forward to teaching to them. And then you get the horn effect, which is the opposite of that. And that's where you can believe that a child is going to be a nightmare because their brother or sister, or possibly even mother or father that you taught previously, was a nightmare, and you know the family and you know it's going to be awful just because you saw their surname on the list. Right? You may also have confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is where you have already made up your mind about a child because you know that they're autistic and ADHD, so you don't think they're going to be able to sit still. And sure enough, on the first day that they come to your school, they can't sit still. Then you could have also conformity bias, which I talked about in my own experience with Maria. You may have attribution error. So I may, for example, make the mistake of thinking that it was Maria who did that particular thing in a class, like shout out, because I'm used to it being her. So I say, Maria, be quiet, even though it wasn't Maria in this situation, it was Sandra. Okay, then you may have gender bias. And this happens a lot with neurodivergent people, insofar as there are still people who assume that because someone is a girl, they can't have hyperactive type ADHD, for example, or because they are a boy, they couldn't possibly be able to mask, right? And it's okay if you had that, it's pretty ingrained in society, but it's the truth. The next, again, is age bias. So again, this comes up quite a lot with masking. People will say, oh yeah, but they're only 4. How could they possibly mask? So masking is where you pretend to be something that you're not. But trust me, you will see very small children in the supermarket going, please like me, I'm cute. Okay, so you may have a bias that somebody couldn't possibly achieve something at that particular age. There can be in and out groups. I hope that this doesn't happen with teachers, but there are sometimes teachers who will inadvertently label a particular group of children because they're from a particular street, or because they're from a particular social group, or because they hang around with each other and they're kind of quote bad news when they get together. And you may have other groups where you've got a table of children in your class who are just your absolute favorite, and we shouldn't have favorites, but unfortunately some of us do. You may have affinity bias. A child reminds you of what you were like when you were in school. You may have authority bias. So, for example, if parents had a particularly high-powered job, then you may have the assumption that those parents are more likely to read with their children at home, even though the people with the high-powered job may not have as much time to read with their children at home. They may never do any reading with them at all, but you may have an unconscious bias that these are the kind of parents who take their children to museums on the weekend, even though that might not be true at all. Heuristic bias is the opposite of authority bias. So that basically means that you assume that somebody is going to be low aspiration because they're a low working class, for example, or because they're from a particular kind of background, like a single parent, etc. Now, again, look, right? These are biases that are carried throughout a society. If you don't have them, it's okay for you to be horrified with them. If you do have them, the main thing is to acknowledge them. Okay. Anchoring bias is where your belief is stuck in a particular place. So you don't believe that this child can achieve this particular thing, or you believe that this child will always be disruptive. Because they've got ADHD, of course they would be. Because ADHD children are violent and difficult. I had that this morning from a different school. Okay. That's called anchoring bias, that you believe that they can't make any progress away from that situation because of their own situation. Intuition bias I've already covered when I talked about Maria, and negativity bias too. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video and think about the types of bias that you see in your school. If you're not sure what any of these mean, look them up or rewind to where I've given an explanation. Welcome back, everybody. So, bias, preconception, and assumption. Okay, so on this picture, we've got a very cute little 4-year-old boy, and he's pulling all kinds of different faces. So you might look at those faces and you might think, oh, he looks cheeky there. Oh, he looks surprised in that one, doesn't he? Oh, he looks really thoughtful in that one. Oh my goodness, he looks like he's about to bite me in that one. Oh, what a little cutie, right? And we think that we know how people are feeling because we think we can look at them and tell how they are feeling automatically. But here's the truth. This little boy was paid a lot of money by a photographer. Well, not him, his parents were paid a lot of money by a photographer who said, I want you to pull faces. Look surprised, look thoughtful, look angry, look mysterious, look shy, look confused. And so he pulled lots of different faces, and this poster was produced, which is now available free to download from pretty much anywhere on the internet. Okay. And it's supposed to be in order to teach children about emotions. But all it teaches you is that children can pull faces when asked, especially those who like being in front of a camera. So there's another piece from Brene Brown. I'm circling back to her, having talked about Daniel Kahneman. And this is again in Atlas of the Heart, which is the 2022 book that she wrote. You can't tell how somebody else is feeling unless you ask them. So when we look at people, we make up a story in our head. And Brene Brown talks about this a lot, right? So the story that you're telling yourself is that they feel a certain way. So you might see somebody walk past them in the park and they go like that. And you think, oh, snooty cow. Oh, she's sniffing at me. She doesn't like me. But actually, she's just got a bit of a cold. So we constantly make up stories in our head about what's going on for other people. But the really important piece of information that we are missing is that you don't know how other people feel unless you ask them. Right, so this brings us to double empathy. I should just put a little bit of a caveat in here. Right, this picture here is not actually meant to teach you about double empathy, but I think it's a very, very good example. So this is two brothers messing about, and there's an older brother and a younger brother. And whenever the older brother comes back home to see the younger brother, they mess about like this. And he does this thing where he rubs him on the head like that. And he thinks his brother absolutely loves him because you can see the big brother, the older one there with the grey jumper on, he's having a lovely time thinking it's hilarious that he does this thing to his brother. And he thinks, oh, this is the way I show love for my brother. He loves it. I love it. It's brilliant. But the thing is, from this point of view, above the younger boy, the older boy can't see him. Okay, his face is facing in a completely different direction, right? If you look at the body language of the younger boy, he's closing his eyes, he's frowning, he's got his hands clenched together, his shoulders are up. He's in a defensive sort of a pose, trying to hold himself in. He clearly doesn't enjoy it. But the older brother can't see that the younger brother doesn't enjoy it. So he's assuming that they are both having the same experience because he's never asked. Okay. Now, this picture is not meant to teach you this, but I do think it teaches us an awful lot. Okay, which brings me to my next point, which is double empathy. So double empathy is a theory. It's a theory that was postulated by Damien Melton, who is an autistic researcher and lecturer from the University of Kent. He also happened to teach me my master's course back at Birmingham University, which was my master's in autism that I did finishing in 2014. So this is, this idea has been around for a few years, but it is debated, right? And it is one way of explaining how autistic people experience empathy. Now, what Damien Milton suggests is that there is this idea of double empathy. So in a nutshell, it goes like this. Neurodivergent stroke autistic people experience empathy one way, and neurotypical people experience empathy in a different way, and there's a mismatch, which doesn't mean that one group or the other doesn't have empathy, although each group will be accused of not having empathy by the other. However, what it does mean is they don't have empathy for the way each other empathizes. So here is a lovely quote from Damien Milton. Simply put, the theory of double empathy problem suggests that when people with very different experiences of the world interact with one another, they struggle to empathize with each other. Okay. Now that pretty much sums it up. And again, I would very much recommend that you look up the double empathy problem by Damien Milton. I've put a link at the bottom of the screen there to his to information advice from autism.org, which is the National Autistic Society website. If you do read Damien Milton's original paper, which I would recommend, again, go to the toilet, have a comfy chair, make sure you've got a cup of tea ready, right? Because it is a long read and it's quite in depth because he speaks about things from a sociological and anthropological point of view. But it is definitely worth investing your time in doing that if you are the sort of person who likes to read about these things. So one explanation, okay, so if I give you a for instance of double empathy in autistic people and neurotypical people, if I were to say to you, oh my goodness, I've lost my job, then if you were an autistic person, you might go, yay, you hated your job anyway, it was rubbish. bet you they're going to give you a big payout. It's nice to get made redundant. You could have some time off. Maybe you could go on your holidays. On the other hand, if I said to a neurotypical friend, oh, I've lost my job, they might go, oh, no, that's terrible. You've got those car payments to make. Haven't you just got yourself a new car on lease? How are you going to make the car payments every? What about your mortgage? How are you going to feed your kids? That's terrible. So sorry that happened to you. Right, now in both cases, those people are showing empathy to you. Now, it might be, for example, that the autistic person doesn't really like their job and is waiting for redundancy and is really excited about the idea that could happen to them. So is congratulating you on the basis of their own experience. And it could be that the neurotypical person is trying to think about what's going on in your life and then kind of guess how that might affect your finances and your family. Okay. Neither of these are the right or the wrong way to experience empathy, but they are different. Okay. And again, this is somewhat debated even by the autistic community, but I certainly think it's a really interesting point. And for me, it works quite well. Now, back to Maria. As I said previously, I struggled to empathize with her situation because I had a different experience of the world from her. So back to Brene Brown. You don't know what other people's life feels like unless you ask. So remember that empathy is about connecting with the emotional experience rather than the events or circumstance. Okay, we're going to have a pause for reflection. What did you know before about empathy that you now see differently? So please pause the video and have a think about that, or you can write down your thoughts or discuss it with others. Welcome back. Okay, so the next thing to consider, the next problem that I had with Maria was that I didn't understand her intersectional experience. Yeah, so the next problem that I had with Maria was that I didn't understand her intersectional experience. So intersectionality is where somebody has, well, pretty much all of us have it to a certain extent, has protected characteristics that may overlap to form their identity. So in this particular case, she came from a culture that I didn't understand. That was not her fault. That was my fault for not understanding her culture. And like I said, I didn't know anything at all about the Gypsy Romany kind of traveler culture. I knew nothing about it at the time. And what I did know was not very pleasant, right? I had massive bias against it, especially kind of my perception of their attitude towards education of women and girls. There's also probably, I didn't really understand anything about her class. Her religion was massively, massively important to her. She was Catholic. I don't come from a Christian background. I've never understood that level of devotion, but it was hugely important to her. And yet she also swore an awful lot. And I couldn't work out how somebody could be Christian and use that many swear words. But then there were certain words that she would say that I would think were kind of like quite low level, like, oh God. And she would get really offended by somebody saying that, whereas dropping an F-bomb in class was absolutely fine as far as she was concerned. So I didn't understand her religious belief. I didn't really know anything about her ethnicity at all. And, I kind of also assumed that by the age of being in year 10, she would have some ability to regulate her own emotions and her impulsivity. So I really couldn't understand why she was coming into class with what I viewed as being a really bad attitude. But that was, again, my unconscious bias of not understanding her intersectional experience. So the next thing is, when you don't know about somebody's culture or their intersectional experience, which could be, they could be their gender, could be their disability, could be their culture, everything that we just listed previously. When you don't know about something, particularly if we're British, it's very easy for us to get terribly embarrassed about something and just not want to mention it. And, it's that whole kind of like Faulty Towers thing of don't mention the war to the Germans and all that kind of stuff. And really, that doesn't help. Getting flustered or not avoiding a topic is where you are almost certainly going to trip up and make mistakes. Almost certainly going to do that, right? If you want to be respectful about somebody's culture, their beliefs, their belonging, their kind of their disability, their gender, their sexuality, any of those kinds of things, then we need to learn how to ask respectful questions. And when you ask respectful questions, you keep the language simple. You validate somebody's experience. So again, right, you're not you haven't had the same experience as this person, but you can evaluate the emotions. So you can validate the emotions. You can say, for example, I could have said to Maria, I understand that those earrings are important to you. You can relate by saying, I have things that are important to me too. And then you can say what resonates. So what I'm hearing from you is that you don't want to take them off because they're important to you. Okay. Now, that's not going to get Maria to take her earrings off, but it is going to probably bring her down a notch so that you can have a reasoned conversation with her. Okay, so back to where we started at the beginning when we're talking about respect. The Oxford English Dictionary defines respect in two ways. Firstly, it's the feeling of deep admiration for someone, which is elicited by their abilities, qualities, and achievements. So respect is elicited. You don't automatically get it from walking into the room because you're a teacher, especially when you've got wee, small, tiny 3- and 4-year-olds. All they see is a grown-up. They've got no idea what your rank and file is. They've got no idea at all. They've never been to school. They don't know, right? So what you have to do is elicit that respect from your abilities, qualities, and achievements. And one of your qualities may be to make them feel that they have psychological safety and that they have that sense of belonging. And secondly, it's due regard for the feelings, wishes, and rights of others. So if I respect you, then I have due regard for your wishes, rights, and feelings. Okay. So in the example of Maria, what I was not doing, and the big problem that I had, was that I did not have due regard for her wishes, rights, or feelings. Now, I'm going to give you a spoiler alert here. She did follow the rules in the end. What changed was my approach, because I previously had not understood her wishes, rights, or feelings, right? And I had not elicited her respect or admiration because of my abilities, qualities, or achievement yet at this point in the story. Now, in other words, like it or not, pupils learn better from teachers whom they like and whom they feel like them. Now, we may all be familiar with the story of Matilda and the lovely Miss Honey. I'm going to assume now, because this is usually the case, that probably about 90% of the people who are watching relate to Miss Honey more than they relate to Trunchbull, because nobody goes into teaching because they want to swing a child round by their pigtails or lock them into the chokey. Those aren't things that we go into teaching for the most part. Most people who go into teaching quite like children and would much rather be seen as Miss Honey than Trunchbull, okay? And the truth of the matter is, you do get better results from children if they think that you like them. And you can't be everyone's cup of tea, and they can't be your cup of tea. But honestly, if you show them due regard, unconditional positive regard and respect, you are going to get better results out of them. And remember, like it or not, respect is a two-way street. An adult's problem with children being able to show respect dates back at least to ancient Greek times. So there was never a day when children had respect for their elders. because respect has to be learned. Which brings us to unconditional positive regard. So Carl Rogers was a humanist psychologist, and he said this back in 1957. So he talked about this idea of unconditional positive regard for all humans. So this is what we should aspire to. And this means that I care for you, you have value, you don't have to do anything to prove it to me, and nothing will change my mind about that. So this matters that no matter how that child shows up to school, no matter what they do, we implicitly show them that we care about them and that they have value as a human being. So this is about dropping our unconscious bias and looking at the human being in front of us. Now, I'm already going to tell you this is going to take effort, because it's quicker to be biased, because 95% of our decisions are made by emotions. But if we are able to recognize our own unconscious bias and come back to this very simple set of beliefs here, that fundamentally we went into teaching, or we became an educator, because we care about the children. We believe that they as individuals have value, and that they don't have to do anything to prove themselves to you, and nothing about what they do or say will change your mind. And that is a really great philosophy to have with humanity. Okay, it's not easy. You do have to put effort into it, because like I said, most of our decisions are unconscious, and you can just take against a person because of unconscious bias, because of what we previously mentioned. But if you actually take a minute to think about it and pause and try and focus upon this, it does make quite a difference to the culture of a school, or your classroom, or the group you're working with, or even the one-to-one individual. So how did it come to pass that I eventually managed to get Maria to take off those huge hoop earrings? Well, I had a big problem with getting her to take off these huge hoop earrings. And I was newly qualified at the time. So my head teacher had suggested that I do a pupil trail, and I chose Maria to see what happened. In the first lesson of the day that I trailed her, she had PE. And the PE teacher at the beginning of the lesson called her over. They had a quick discussion, which I didn't even really see or hear. And Maria took her earrings off and gave them to the PE teacher, who put them in a pocket on her jacket. It was an arm pocket that was see-through, and she put Maria's earrings into that pocket. And then Maria popped off to play football, which was one of her favorite pursuits. And I was completely and utterly astounded that anyone could get this argumentative and difficult child, as I saw her, to take off those gigantic gold hoop earrings. So again, I was completely blown away by this matter. And at that moment, I felt a little bit humiliated. I felt embarrassed. I felt astounded, and I couldn't believe that this colleague of mine, who was approximately the same age and experience as me, had managed to do such what I thought was a completely astounding thing. So after school that day, I went to see this particular colleague of mine, the PE teacher, and I said, "That was amazing what you did with Maria earlier. What how do you get her to take those massive earrings off? She's so attached to them. I spend 20 minutes of my lesson arguing with her about those earrings. What is it that you're doing that I'm not doing? And the teacher looked at me and she quite simply said, well, I just showed an interest in her. And I was just like, what? What do you mean you showed an interest in her? What are you talking about? She said, well, on the first day, we were like walking out to the football pitch and I was walking next to her and I said, where'd you get the earrings from? And she told me a story about how she'd been really close to her granddad and he had given her those earrings for her 13th birthday. And she was really proud of them. And it was a very precious present that he'd, saved up for to get her, especially on her 13th birthday. And shortly afterwards, he'd passed away. And she had basically decided that she would always wear these earrings to commemorate her granddad because they reminded her of him. And they were obviously extremely precious to her. And I was just completely astounded because I was like, I had no idea. I had no idea. And the other teacher said, yeah, exactly. That's the reason that she makes such a fuss about the earrings is because they remind her of her granddad. So what I did is we kind of had a discussion about, like I said, look, you can't really wear them for football because it's not safe for you to do so. Because like one of the other girls could easily like rip it out of your ear or something. You'd lose the earring. You could end up bleeding. It's not a good idea. So what I said to her was, what would have to happen for you to feel that the earrings were safe, but for you to be able to remove them before we have football? And she said, oh, I need to have them in a place I can see them the entire time. So the PE teacher said, oh, well, that's okay, because I've got this clear pocket on my rugby top here. So what I can do is you can take the earrings off every lesson. I will put them in that pocket. So they're nice and safe there. You can see the earrings the entire time. That they're sealed in with a bit of Velcro across the top. It's completely safe for you to have them. And then I'll just give them back to you at the end of the lesson. And Maria was completely happy with that. The PE teacher was happy with that. And so that's what they did. That was their solution to the problem. And yet I hadn't thought of it. Okay, so another thing that was going on here. When you go into teaching or education in general, you don't often get much training in management or leadership, and yet you are immediately expected to go into both management and leadership roles pretty much from the off. And this is the thing about it. I've basically just condensed down what management and leadership are into one slide, right? It goes like this. A good manager identifies resources, allocates those resources, and directs activities. Okay. So in our day-to-day lessons, as teachers and support staff, teaching children on a daily basis, we are identifying resources, including human resources. We are allocating those resources and we are directing the activity, i.e. the learning within the class. So we talk a lot about good classroom management skills, and those are very important. And those are the three things you have to do for classroom management, just those three things. On the other hand, ideally, what we want to do when we're creating a culture is to show good leadership. Okay. And there are going to be times when you swap between leadership and management, particularly if your role is leadership or your role is management, you're going to do more of one and less of the other. But it's really important that we know we have both skill sets available to us. So a good leader provides direction. Okay. So I received my class at the end of year 3 and I'm going to take them through year 4 so they are ready for year 5, right? And I am taking them in the direction that I can see that they are, so that they've got that little bit more, academic learning, a little bit more social learning, and a little bit more maturity to be able to be ready for year 5 by the time I finish with them, right? I'm going to provide vision, right? So I am going to show them how they can be the best people that they can be. I'm going to show them how they can meet their aspirations. I'm going to show them how I can support them, right? And how they can feel like they have that psychological safety and that sense of belonging that they crave, right? And then I'm also going to demonstrate optimism. Now, I am a hopelessly optimistic person, right? I really can demonstrate optimism very well. I always see the sunny side of things, but I know it's not everyone's true nature. I know that not everybody has this, but in the moment, if you can say something good about what's happening, then it does go an awful long way to making people have some belief in you. And, you know, when you are working with children, whether it's one-to-one, whether it's with a whole class, or whether you run an entire community or a school, demonstrating some optimism that we can do this and we will do it together, and we are going to have high hopes and aspirations for you, but we're also going to give you the level of support that you need. And if you can do that and demonstrate that, then it can make the biggest difference to the culture of a school. And if you want more information about that, I have done a blog called Simple Solutions for Classroom Management, which is available on my website, neuroteachers.com. Right, so let's have a little think about how leaders provide vision. In your school, it is about creating a culture of empathy and respect that you need to have. In order to do that, you need to have vision. So no matter what your role is, right, you could be an LSA, TA, HLTA, cover supervisor, other member of support staff, okay? You might not be directly involved in the leadership of the school, but you are still a leader. Okay, you are still a leader in every single day. Those children look up to you, no matter what your role is. Okay. And the best way, I mean, look, I've told you throughout this what is, right? So empathy is about you relating to the emotional experience of somebody, not the actual, you know, day-to-day experience of somebody, their emotional connection to something. And respect is about showing people, engendering, eliciting that respect from people because of your ability. And you do that on a daily basis. If you're not happy with the circumstances that is around you, or things need to improve, coming back to the idea that you possess a vision and that you can see, like, you know, this tiny child in front of you, they're going to get things wrong, right? They're children. They're going to make mistakes. You're going to give them something to do the first time, and they are just going to make a royal hash of it because they're children and children grow. But if you have that vision, not only of what they're going to be like by the time you finish their year-long journey with you, but that 25-year-old adult, right? You want them to hopefully have a job or be in full-time study. You want them to have a place to live, maybe away from their parents even. Maybe they're living with a partner, or they've got friends that they live with. They're in a flat share or a house share somewhere. Maybe they've got a really good job. Maybe they're studying something really cool. You know, that they have friends around them, that they have relationships, that they have a good life, that they're able to put food on their own table, etc. That is the vision that you have for this child. And the way you can take them forward is through that idea of empathy and respect. Okay. Now, our neurodivergent children often can experience even more disillusionment because they haven't had an adult yet who can believe in them. But trust me, and you'll know this yourself from your own experience, you only need one adult to understand, to show you empathy, show you respect, and that unconditional positive regard, for it to just sweeten your day enough for you to get through the maze that is education. Okay, so circling back to the child that you had in mind, right? I explained to you what happened with Maria. For me, so taking things forward, after I'd spoken to the PE teacher, I decided it would be a good idea for me to show some interest in her. And I just found times, you know, down times when I happened to see her around the school. I didn't make a particular effort for it. I just would see her in the corridor and I would go and approach her and have a chat with her about a few things for a couple of minutes to try and build that relationship up. And at one point I even sort of said to her, so it's interesting because Miss Brown was telling me about the earrings, not her real name, by the way, about your earrings, and she said they had a real sentimental attachment for you. I mean, could you explain that to me a little bit? And she told me the story about her grandfather, and she told me why they meant so much. And I said, look, if I'd have known, I could have done so much better with you. I'm sorry that I've made it such a battle about the earrings. What could we do so that you feel that they are safe, but you're also applying with the rules? Because I have to enforce the rules. Those are the uniform rules of the school. It's my job to do that. On the other hand, I don't want you to feel like I'm taking something that's very precious to you away from you. So what could we do about that? And she actually came up with this suggestion, and strange as it may seem, it actually worked. She agreed that she would take her earrings off at the beginning of each lesson and put them in her pencil case, which was a see-through pencil case, and put them on her desk in front of her. So she could see them the whole time, I could see them the whole time, and they weren't in her ears. And you know, we did that for the rest of the year, and it worked. We never had a battle about that ever again. In fact, our relationship generally improved an awful lot. And I wouldn't say it was perfect. It certainly wasn't, right? But we started to see each other for the human beings that we are. We started to engender empathy and respect for one another. And by the end of the year, we got on okay. So the question is, what does empathy and respect look like for your particular neurodivergent child in mind? Now, there is a possibility that because of your unconscious bias or because of things that have happened previously, that you don't even necessarily much like them, or they might not necessarily much like you, but you can always change that around with relationships. So it's about thinking about, what does empathy and what does respect mean for you and that particular child? Okay, so now pause the video and think about what empathy and respect would look like for your particular neurodivergent child in mind. Okay, so welcome back. Right, we're coming up to the end now, and this is an important part of creating culture. So this is called the social model of discipline. It's quite an oldie but a goldie. It is one that I like to put in a lot of my training, so you will have seen it before. I do not apologise for that. And you will see it in Module 4 as well. So fundamentally, it goes like this. If you're working with anybody, then you get better results if you do things with and not to. My big mistake with Maria was that I was trying to do things to her in a punitive manner. So I assumed, because I was quite a young teacher and I didn't know any better, that if I just punished her or told her off or was vigilant in that sort of way, that she would just take her earrings off, because that's the obvious thing to do, isn't it? I mean, children are supposed to comply to the rules because those are the school rules. If she doesn't understand the rules, then I'll just give her detention. If she didn't understand them the next lesson, so I gave her detention. I put her on report. I sent her to the head of year, etc., etc., etc. Nothing worked. She still had the earrings on. Okay, because I was doing things too. I hadn't actually bothered to find out why those earrings were important to her. Okay. Now, my other option could have been to not do anything. I could have just ignored the earrings, okay? But if I ignored the earrings, then I wouldn't be meeting her emotional need. That would be neglectful. And ultimately, she is part of a school. And like I said, when you're part of a school, there are rules. And so you have to comply to the rules. Even if you don't necessarily agree with them, you have to comply to the rules, because that is part of society. And part of us in school is that we have to teach children how to follow the rules. If they don't agree with them, there are mechanisms by which they can discuss them. Being argumentative is not one of them. If I had just ignored her argumentativeness, if I had just ignored the fact that she was wearing these earrings, I would have been being neglectful. I wouldn't have been doing my job, and I certainly wouldn't have been supporting her emotional needs. My other option would have been to do things for her. So I could have gone, oh, you poor thing, Maria, are you having a really hard time? Shall I help you with that? Are you finding it difficult to get the earrings out of your ear? Shall I try and undo them for you? Are they a bit stiff and is the catch not working? That would be completely inappropriate. right? It would also be permissive. And ultimately, what would happen is that I would be I would be doing I would be encouraging learned helplessness for her, and that is not useful either. Ultimately, she was a 14-year-old. She didn't need me doing stuff for her, right? So in the end, the thing that worked was that I worked with her. Okay, so I understood the emotional experience of wearing those earrings because they were important to her. They were her granddad's last gift. They had cost him money. He had saved up for them. They had chosen them together. They'd gone to the jewelers together. It was a very nice memory of her grandfather. And those earrings were being worn in memory of her grandfather. So I didn't understand the emotional experience. Once I did, and I was able to work with, and I was able to say to her, what would have to happen for you to safely take those earrings off and for us to not have a conflict in the lesson, she was able to find a solution herself, which was fundamentally taking the earrings off and putting them in a clear pencil case in front of herself so she could see them the entire lesson, but them to not be in her ears. Okay, so whatever we do, we get far better results if we work with children rather than doing things to them, for them, or ignoring them. So what does this mean for your particular child in mind? Right. As a little recap, the first thing is you have to know your child. So know everything about them. Try and understand their intersectional experience, okay? What is making them tick? What is their family life like? What is their cultural experience like? Do they have a particular religious belief? Are there any other disabilities affecting them? What's their socioeconomic circumstances? What kind of background are they from? How are they part of their community? And then it's a case of understanding your own bias. Look, it is okay for us to have bias. The reason we have bias is because it's quicker. If you had to sit there every morning thinking, shall I put my right sock on or my left one? It would waste so much time. You'd never get to work or school. Okay. So it's okay that we have unconscious bias. What is important is that we recognize that we have it and try and do something about it. Okay. So this is where we were going to try and move away from our automatic reaction to reflecting upon why we had that particular reaction to that child in those circumstances and thinking about what we can do to break those unconscious bias down and then use logical thought at a different time to see if we can approach the problem from a different point of view. The next thing is when we're talking about particularly children's behavior, and we'll go into this in the next session in a lot more detail, if we focus on the emotion and not the action. Okay, so in Maria's case, she was being argumentative and saying no, she wasn't going to take the earrings off. No way, under no circumstances. You can't make me. I hate you. Who do you think you are? Etc. etc. The emotion behind that was grief, okay, and fear. And also that she was going to, something important to her was going to be taken away from her. We need to be concentrating on the emotion that Maria was experiencing and not on her actions. Finally, we need to create a sense of unconditional positive regard, which we talked about previously. And then we need to show leadership, which is about us showing vision and optimism within our classes or our community. If you do have any questions, I'm highly contactable on social media or via email. Don't forget that if you want to have more information and free resources available to you, such as videos and handouts, things that you can use in your classroom, blogs and other information, you can sign up to our newsletter here. So please pause the video and take a photograph of the QR code and it will link you straight into the sign up for our newsletter. And finally, if you'd like to contact me, here is my email address. I'm available on any of these social media platforms as @NeuroTeachers. It is the easiest way to contact me is through a social media platform. So please do go ahead and do that. Thank you ever so much for your participation today. I hope you've enjoyed our presentation. I've been Catrina Lowri. Thank you very much.